Okay. We're ready? Good morning. We begin today's daf. Gittin, daf Mem Zayin. We begin by thanking the sponsors. The sponsor of all the Talmud Torah for the month of Tammuz, Naftali Tilson of Talmud Israel, in honor of the yahrzeit of his dear parents, Yomi ben Avram Leib, as well as his mother Rivka Bas Yaakov, in the merit of himself, the entire Daf Chevra, and they should complete the Daf cycle in good health. Eternal thanks to Rabbi Silber, and the neshamas of his parents should have an aliyah, and the family should have a nechama. We also thank the sponsor of the week of learning, Tova Nes Aver. May the Rav continue to be blessed with wisdom and understanding to teach and guide. Amen. We also thank Jacob and Julie Blumenfeld for sponsoring the week of learning, Nishmas, Jacob's grandmother, Henna Bas Mordechai, Jean Goldman. The neshama should have an aliyah, and the family should have a nechama. So my apologies in advance, or maybe not in advance, but to those who were not here for Zaf yesterday, we got a little bit carried away. We were so excited about the sugya of cannibalism yesterday that we went so far, we almost finished today's whole Amud yesterday. So we're not going to do it again, but if anybody has any questions on the Gemara from yesterday, I'm happy to answer questions as well. Maishi perhaps can send out the recording, not yesterday's recording. Baruch Hashem, we don't have that, but the recording of the Rav's daf from the previous cycle, for those who are not here. We're going to start today in Daf Mem Zayin at Aleph at the Mishnah, which is almost halfway down the Amud. Mishnah begins, Hamochar es sadeu l'oved kochavim, a person who sells his field to an akum, to ovdei kochavim, halacha is lokeach umevi mimenu bikurim mipnei tikun olam. There are two gersos. There are two ways to read this Mishnah. We're going to go the simple way of reading it, the way it appears in the Mishnah, and the way the Rashi seems to understand it, which is that we don't want people to be selling land in Eretz Yisrael to akum, to ovdei kochavim. We'd rather the land in Eretz Yisrael stay in the hands of Yidden. And therefore, because of Tikkun Olam, because we want to ensure that the land of Eretz Yisrael stays in the hand of Yisrael, therefore, if somebody sells his land to an akum, then the halacha is every year he needs to go back to that akum who bought the land, and lokeach, he needs to buy from him the bikurim, the first fruits of that season, and he has to bring those bikurim to the Beis HaMikdash. So, and why is that Mipnei Tikkun Olam? Because we want to keep the land of Eretz Yisrael in the hand of Yisrael as opposed to into the land of Akum. Tosfos has another girsa, but ultimately we're going to go with this girsa that he has to go ahead and buy it. Now Rashi points out that he may actually have to spend a lot of money. If you look at Rashi, Lokech umevi bikurim, b'chal shana tzarich likach min ha'oved kochavim bikurei peiroseha b'damim yikarim umevi'am liyushalayim. So you have to understand, it's not only us, it's not only Yisrael, Yidden, who have value to the first grown fruits. Everybody likes to see the first grown fruits. Everybody wants to have the first grown fruits, and there's value to it. He has to reserve the first grown fruits every single year, and he has to pay a high price for whatever that new owner of the field is going to charge him to buy those fruits to actually bring the bikurim, the first grown fruits, to the Beis HaMikdash like you would do in any other year. Now the Gemara is going to go on to get into a very famous discussion that comes up in Shas a number of times. It's all in a lead up to get back to our Mishnah, but there's a discussion over here of whether or not a non-Jew who purchases land in Eretz Yisrael has the ability through that purchase to actually take away the kedusha, the sanctity of the land of Eretz Yisrael. What does that mean? That means that we know the living in Chutz La'aretz, because we don't live in Eretz Yisrael, if we were to do any type of agricultural work here, we are not subject to the halachos of Trumas and Maasros and the other land-related halachos. Land-related halachos really are reserved for Eretz Yisrael. Those are dinim specifically to Eretz Yisrael, and they are directly connected to the Kedushas Eretz Yisrael, to the sanctity of the land of Eretz Yisrael. The question over here is, if an akum, if a non-Jew purchases land in Eretz Yisrael, does the fact that they own that land take away that special sanctity of the land of Eretz Yisrael? What's going to be the nafkamina? What will be the difference? The difference is whether or not they are obligated to still take off truma and meiser from what grows there. And one of the other points that come out, we're not going to get into this discussion today, but one of the very heated discussions that comes up every 7 years nowadays is whether or not the heter mechira in Eretz Yisrael during Shemitah accomplishes anything. Because if you're going to be of the opinion that a non-Jew who purchases land in Eretz Yisrael really does not remove the Kedushas Haaretz from it, then absolutely nothing happens when a non-Jew purchases the land. And this is obviously the main point. This is one of the main points that comes up in terms of the sale. There are other issues there as well, in terms of whether you're allowed to sell it and everything else that comes along. But the bottom line is, this is a very famous Shas sugya, and we're obviously going to connect it to our Mishnah. That connection doesn't happen to Mem Zayin Amud Beis, but we're going to start with another of other attempts just to bring the sugya out. Amar Rabbi. Rabbi says, Afal Pi. She'ein kinyan le'oved kuchavim beretz Yisrael lafgia midei meiser. In other words, he lays this down as a davar pasha, to something which is simple, that an akum does not have the ability to be able to buy land in Eretz Yisrael and thereby remove the chiyuv to take off the meiser tithings and give meiser. In other words, because he owns the land, does not remove the kedusha from the land, and therefore whatever grows there, the produce that grows out of there, still is subject to the halachas of meiser, and meiser needs to be taken off and given to the appropriate places. Shenemar, how does he prove that? Where does that come from? For the pasuk says, Ki li haaretz. Li kedushas haaretz. He understands from the pasuk says clearly that the land belongs to me. And therefore, if the land belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, me belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, nobody has the ability to ever buy that land and take it away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It means li kedusha sa'aretz. The kedusha is eternal, belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore nobody purchasing it has the ability to remove that kedusha. However, Rabbi says, "Avol yesh kinin lo beit kochavim be'eretz Yisrael lach barbo boros sichin uma'aros." Says Rabbi, while it's true that he can remove the kedusha, he does have the ability to purchase the land, and he has the rights to use the land to dig ditches, trenches, and other types of digging and use of the land. In other words, he has the right to use the land for whatever purpose he wants, but he does not have the right to actually use the land to remove the kedusha from it. Shenemar, how does he know that the akum is allowed to use the land for whatever he wants? Shenemar hashamayim. Shemayim Lashem. The Shemayim, the heavens, belong to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. However, Haaretz, the land, Nasan Livnei Adam, was given to Bnei Adam, and therefore Bnei Adam, who have the land, have the rights to do what they want with the land. A Jew can sell it, a Jew can buy it, a non-Jew can buy it, a non-Jew can use it, and therefore, in terms of use, the Akum has no problem using land at Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Lazar disagrees, and he says exactly the opposite. Even though a non-Jew who purchases land in Eretz Yisrael can thereby remove the kedusha and is not obligated to take off the tithings of meiser, shenemar, for it says diganecha. The pasuk refers to the chiyuv with the word digancha, which means your grain. However, this yours specifically refers to Yidin v'lo dagan oved kochavim. The only person who has to give meiser is someone who is digancha, you, referring to Klal Yisrael. But dagan oved kochavim is not chayiv in meiser, and therefore, if a non-Jew purchases land in Eretz Yisrael, he is not obligated to take meiser from the produce. Aval, he says the opposite. Ein kin le'oved kochavim be'Eretz Yisrael lach b'barbaros sichin u'maros. He does not have the right to actually purchase land in Eretz Yisrael and use it for whatever he wants. Where does he get that from? Shenemar, for it says in the pasuk, La Hashem haaretz. The land belongs to Hashem. Actually, we just said it this morning in the Yom. Today is Sunday. L'David Mizbar La Hashem haaretz. Okay, right. So just from this morning, we said it just this morning, and the land belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore, at no point in time does anybody have the ability to be able to do what they want with the land, because it belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and for that reason, Ovdei Kochavim cannot use the land for whatever purpose they feel like. So very nice. We have a diametrically opposed machlokus over here. Rabbi says, well, it's true that an akum could buy land in Eretz Yisrael, and the akum can use it for whatever he wants, he does not have the ability to remove the kedusha. Rabbi Eliezer disagrees, and he says the opposite. He says that yes, an akum will not have to take off meiser, but cannot do whatever he wants with the land. So the Gemara asks the question, what is the subject of the machlokas? What are they arguing about? What are the points they're arguing about? Mar Savar, one opinion is, Rabba's opinion is, Diganecha. Sorry, this is Rabbi Elazar's opinion. Digancha v'lo dagan ovid kachavim. The word digancha comes to exclude the grain that belongs to akum. And Umar Savar, Rabbi is of the opinion that you don't read the word as digancha, rather digunecha, which is more a description of the action of the digun. It's more of like a verb, which Rashi explains. This refers to miruach. V'lo digun oved kachavim. Now, the basic idea over here is, person is not chayiv to give meiser until after miruach. Miruach is at the final stage, when they smooth out the pile. At that point in time, that's when meiser is chayiv. So the way that Rabbi's learning it is digun chavlo digun oved kachavim, which means at that point in time there's not going to be any chiyuv. But before that, there is a chiyuv. Amar Rabba, Mino Aminallah. From where do I know this? It says in the Mishnah, Haleket v'ashikcha v'apeya. Leket, shikcha, and peya are basically, peya is when leaving over the corner. Leket and shikcha is leaving over either stalks or individual bundles, either bundles or stalks that were left in the field. The halacha is that you can't pick them up. Now, the Mishnah says, Haleket v'ashikcha v'apeya, if any of these forgotten things in the field, shall oved kachavim, that from an oved kachavim, chayiv b'meiser is chayiv and meiser. So the Mishnah sounds very clear. It says, Leket, shikcha, and peya and peya of an oved kachavim, chayiv and meiser, ela imkain hifkir, unless he actually goes ahead and he's mafkir it, he makes it hefker that anybody who wants can come and get it. Now the Gemara does not understand what this is talking about. Hechitami, what is the actual scenario in this case? Ilema di Yisrael, if we're talking about a field that belongs to Yisrael, and now vilaktinu oved kochavim, the person who's gathering, he's harvesting the field, is an oved kochavim. So hold on a second. The field belongs to a Yisrael, and there's an akum who's actually doing the harvest. Elam kain hifgir. What does it mean when the Mishnah says, unless he's mafgir it, unless he actually makes the leket shikha and peya hefker, makes it public property? Hamafgiri v'kaimi. It's not his choice. The halacha is, if he by mistake leaves the leket, the shikha and peya in the field, peyas intentionally, but ultimately it's automatically going to be hefker. So what does it mean unless he's mafgir it? It's obviously going to be hefker. You don't need the akum to go ahead and be a mafgir it. Elolav, it must be to oved kochavim. The field must belong to oved kochavim. So this is a scenario of a field in Eretz Yisrael that belongs to an akum. And now, what's the case for Laktinu Yisrael? A Yisrael is one who's gathering. So now, Taima to Hifkir. The reason why it's not Chayiv and Meiser is because he actually went ahead and was mafkir it. Hello, Hifkir. If the akum would not have been mafkir it, Chayiv. In other words, the halacha is there's no chiyuv of meiser on something which is public property, on something which is hefker. So now the whole reason over here why it became pater is because he was mafkir it. But if he wasn't mafkir it, chayiv. So we see very clearly that the halacha would be under normal circumstances. If it was not hefker, then you'd be chayiv to give meiser even on grain that grows in a field that belongs to an akum. Gemara says, lo, made a mistake. That's not correct. L'olam di Yisrael. Really, this is talking about a field that belongs to a Yisrael. And yes, v'laktinu oved kochavim. And it's talking about a case where the non-Jew, the akum, is actually the one who is harvesting the field, is gathering everything together. Your claim was that if it belongs to a Yisrael, then it's natural that everything becomes hefker. Well, hold on a second. It's true that when the Yisrael was mafkir everything, he made everything public property that anybody who wants can come get it. He had in mind that if the Yisrael will come and pick it up, then it will become hefker. Would it actually become hefker Was he actually mafkeret, having in mind that an akum will come get it? The answer is no, and that's the reason why we differentiate between whether or not he was mafkeret or not, which is interesting. It's not really this sugya for today, but the Gemara seems to indicate over here that the hefker, the leket shichon peah really only transfers to the property of the one who picks it up when he gets it. There are some differences that come out of that. Some say that as soon as it's left there, it's hefker, and anybody who wants can have it. Our Gemara seems to indicate that it's kind of waiting until the person comes to get it. When the person comes to get it is when the hefker status actually kicks in. That's why it depends who comes to get it. Tashema. The Gemara is going to try to bring a raya to this concept of yesh koch biyad akum, to go ahead and buy land in Eretz Yisrael. Is there the ability in the hands of an akum to go ahead to remove the kedusha from the land? Yisrael shalakach sadam yovet kachavim, a Jew who bought a field in Eretz Yisrael from an akum. Ad shelo hevi shlish. When did he buy it? He bought it before any of the produce that was growing there actually produced a third of its growth. Now, v'chazar umachra lo mishehevi ashlish. So he bought it when everything was like really at an early stage of growth. Now the Jew owns it, and under his ownership, what happened? It actually grew a third of its growth, and then he returned it. He sold it back to the akum. What's the halacha? Chayeves b'maiser. What grew in that field is chayev in maiser. Why? The Mishnah explains, shekvar nischayva, it already became chayev in maiser during the time that the Jew owned it. So what does this clearly indicate? Nischayva in, lo nischayva lo. In other words, we have a case over here which is very clear. It's almost black on white. If an akum owns a field, and under his ownership it doesn't grow, then he transfers ownership to the Yisrael, and then it grows, and then the Yisrael sells it back to the akum. The halacha is that it's chayiv and meiser. Why? Because it became chayiv under the hands of the Yisrael. This seems to indicate very clearly that the only reason why it's chayiv meiser is because a Yisrael owned it. The Gemara says no. What are we talking about in this case? Bisuria. We're talking about a very specific area of Eretz Yisrael, because kibush yachid lo shmei kibush. This is talking about the area that David annexed by himself. In other words, he was the one who conquered these different territories, and Surya is just an example of it. Rashi says this is Aram Tzova, but ultimately the halachas of Meiser in this area are different, and since we are following the opinion that says that this is not really a kibush of Eretz Yisrael, so it doesn't really belong to Eretz Yisrael, it's an annexation that works in terms of their ability to be able to use the land, but ultimately it doesn't give the kedusha to Eretz Yisrael, and it's for that reason that the halachas are going to be different, that only if Yisrael actually owned it, then it would be chayiv and meiser. But the halachas would be different if it was in Eretz Yisrael proper. So the Gemara says, okay, fine, we're going to have to leave that raya. It's not going to be able to prove anything to us about whether or not an akum has the ability to remove the kedusha from Eretz Yisrael and thereby exempt it from the chayiv of meiser. Tashema, 2 lines from the bottom. The Gemara attempts to bring another raya. Yisrael v'ovid kuchavim shlachu sad b'shutvis. A Yid and an Akum went into business together, and they bought a field as partners. On the top of Mem Zayin Amud Beis, the halacha is Tevel v'chulin mu'uravin zeh b'zeh. In every stalk of grain, or I should say in every kernel of grain, you're going to have a Tevel, which means you have grain that has not had the proper tithings taken off of it, and the other half of it's going to be chulin. It's going to be perfectly permissible to be eaten. Why is that? These are the words of Divrei Rabbi, because according to Rabbi, we're going to talk about Breira in just a minute, but just on a simple level, everything that grows belongs halfway to the Yisrael and halfway to the Akum. So you see very clearly that what belongs to the Yisrael is chayiv and truma and meiser. What belongs to the Akum is not chayiv and truma and meiser. Continuing in that brayso, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, no, shel oved kachavim pater. the grain that belongs to the Oved Kochavim is pater and meiser, does not have to give truma and meiser. Shal Yisrael, when it comes to the grain that belongs to the Yisrael, chayiv, it's chayiv to give meiser. Now, we essentially have a machlokes between Rabbi and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, how we look at the grain that grows. Do we say that every single grain is halfway tevel, which means untithed grain, and halfway chulin, which means grain that does not have to have any tithings taken off? Or do we say what belongs to the Yisrael has to give truma and meiser, what belongs to the akum does not have to give truma and meiser? And what's this machlokes? The Gemara explains. At Kadlo Pligi, their whole discussion, the whole machlokes is only Ella de Mar Savar Yesh Breira, Umar Savar Ein Breira. They are having machlokes about retroactive clarification. It seems like we discuss this at least once a week at Daf Yomi. What is this? Retroactive clarification is when at the time that I actually divide something, or at the time that something comes into this world, I don't know who it belongs to. Later on, when we make the division, we'll find out which half belongs to the Yisrael, which half belongs to the Akum. Can we say that retroactively that's how it was the whole time? That's the machlokes between Rabbi and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Well, Rabbi will say, no, you can't retroactively clarify what belonged to the Yisrael, what belonged to the Akum. And Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, yes, you can. You can retroactively clarify which grain belonged to the Yisrael, and that's chayiv and truma meiser. And you can retroactively clarify which grain belonged to the Akum, and that's not chayiv and truma meiser. But it seems like everybody is of the opinion that what belongs to the Akum is not chayiv and truma and meiser, and that seems to be clear. Aval tekuli alma yesh kinyan le'oved kochavim be'eretz Yisrael afkia midei meiser. It seems to be a very clear raya that the land that belongs to the Akum is not chayiv and meiser, and therefore we should have a very clear raya to that halacha. Gemara says no. Again, we're going to dismiss that raya by saying hachanami here to Bisoria. We are referring to a specific geographic location in Eretz Yisrael, which was in Soria, which was not in Eretz Yisrael proper, because Savar and those Tanoim in that Mishnah are of the opinion that kibush yachid lo shmei kibush, that when one person goes ahead and does a conquering of a part of the land of Eretz Yisrael, that does not actually give it the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, and it's for that reason that again, it does have a lot of the similar halachas to Eretz Yisrael, but we're much more mekel, and therefore an Akum who owns land there will not have to actually give meiser. Amar Rav Chia bar Oven. Chia bar Oven says, Tashema, I'm going to try to bring a raya to this halacha, and this is where it comes back to our sugya. Hamocher sedeu loved kuchavim, a person who sells his field to an akum, to a guy in Eretz Yisrael. What's the halacha? What's our Mishnah? Lokeach umevi bikurim ipnei tikkun olam. He has to go ahead and buy the fruits, the first grown fruits, back from that akum and bring bikurim. Ipnei tikkun olam. Why does he have to do this? What does the Mishnah say? Mishnah does not say because the halacha is that the non-Jew has no ability to remove the chiyuv of bikurim. The Mishnah simply says because of tikkun olam. We want things to work out well, which is in this case we explained we don't want people to be selling land in Eretz Yisrael. Now the Gemara says very clear. Hold on. Tikkun olam. What's the reason why we obligate the seller to go back and buy the first grown fruits? That is tikkun olam in. Yeah, it's because of tikkun olam. Midoraisa, from a biblical level, low. There's no chiyuv midoraisa for him to go back and now buy those fruits. So we should see, it seems very clear from our Mishnah itself that the obligation for bikurim is only a rabbinic decree of tikkun olam, but not a biblical mitzvah of bikurim. That must be because ein kinyan le'oved kochavim be'eretz Yisrael lafkia. I should know the opposite. Yesh kinyan be'eretz Yisrael la'akum lafkia mikdushasa. Once the non-Jew buys it, he has the ability to remove the chiyuvim of Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara says, no, that's not a good raya. Well, it sounded like it would be a great raya. It sounded like this would be clear, like black and white. The Gemara says, I'm sorry, it's not going to work. Amar Rav Ashi, you're misunderstanding what happened over here. Shtei takanos havu. There were two different takanos that were relevant over here. Number one, meikara in the beginning, hevi maisi midoraisa. In the beginning, they went with the strict letter of the law of doraisa, which was that, a Yid owns land in Eretz Yisrael, he sells it to a non-Jew. The halacha is, you must midoraisa go back and take those first grown fruits and bring them as bikurim. Now, kiven the chazu dikamikri umizbeni, people were saying, you know what? What's the problem with selling land in Eretz Yisrael to an akum? The kedusha stays there. We're still going to go ahead and bring all the bikurim. So big deal. We'll sell it. So the savri b'kedusha sayu kaiman. They said, you know what? Everything stays with the same level of kedusha. What could be what could be wrong with selling land in Eretz Yisrael? I have a good offer on my piece of property. I'll sell it. So therefore, takinu lahu chazal made takana the low laisu. They should not bring bikurim. In other words, the impact should hit them. So Chazal said, we want to actually, yeshkach b'yad chachamim, lakor davar min haTorah. Chachamim have the ability to be oker certain mitzvahs from the Torah, because they recognize that there's a problem over here. So they said, you know what? If you sell your land to an akum in Eretz Yisrael, I'm hereby letting you know, from then on, there's not going to be any bikurim bro from that land. And that actually hits people with the thought, like, oh my, you know what? That's pretty intense. All these years I owned this land, I was bringing bikurim. I made a sale, and look what happened to the land. It lost its kedusha. Now, kivan dechazu demandalo sagile mizbin v'kamashtakim biad ovid kechavim hadu takinule. What happened was, so for most people it actually worked. But you know what? When someone's strapped for cash, people start saying, you know what? I don't have enough money. People are offering me money for my land. I'm selling it to them. You know what? It will lose its kedusha. So be it. Now, at that point in time, they said, but you know what, now our takana is actually hitting us. Because we made a takana that people should not bring the bikurim because we wanted the impact to hit them, and then they won't sell the land, but they're selling the land anyway. So it's not working. So therefore, hadar takinu lahu delaisu. They went ahead and made a takana that they should bring it. And that's where our Mishnah was talking about. Our Mishnah was talking about the tikkun olam in the second iteration of this takana. So again, we don't have a raya from our Mishnah that it's only midrabanan, and it possibly would have been midaraisa, but the takana that our Mishnah is talking about is the second iteration of the takana after the first one didn't work. Itmar. The Gemara continues. Now we're going to go on to another discussion. Hamocher sadeu leperos. What happens if a person sells his field, but he doesn't actually sell the actual physical field, rather he sells the rights to use the field and everything that grows from the field. So now, Rabbi Yochanan says, Mevi Vikari. We're talking about Bikurim over here. The halacha is the one who bought the field. Again, he doesn't actually own the land. What he owns, the rights to everything that grows in the land. Maybe he brings Bikurim, Vikore, and he actually reads. When the person brings Bikurim, the beginning of Parshas Kisavo, there's a whole discussion of what he has to read. He has to read Psukim from the Torah. So it says, Rav Yochanan, the person who bought the field for the Peros, he brings Bikurim, and he reads the Parsha of Bikurim like everybody else, and it's a real full-fledged Bikurim. Rish Lakish says, maybe ve'eno kare. He brings Bikurim, however, he does not read the Parsha of Bikurim. Now, why not? We don't have that much in the Rishonim on our page specifically, but it's brought in other places. If you, the reason is, if you look at the Psukim say very clearly, I'm bringing the Reishis Priyo Adama, the first grown of fruits, Ha'adama, what grew from the land, Asher Nasata Li, that you gave to me. Rish Lakish says that's just not true. You can't say Reishis Priyo Adama Asher Nasata Li if you don't own the land. You might have rights to use this land, and you might have rights to the peros that grow from it, but ultimately the land doesn't belong to you, therefore he says not to read it. Now the Gemara explains, the Gemara is not explaining the pasuk that it comes from, but the logic. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Mevi Vikore. Rabbi Yochanan says he brings it and he reads the parsha of Bikurim. Why? Because kinyan peros kikinyan hagoftami. According to Rabbi Yochanan, when I buy something for the rights to what grows from it, it's as if I have actually bought the physical body as well. So if I buy a field for the rights of what grows in the field, so I buy the rights to everything that grows there, says Rav Yochanan, I essentially bought the field. Rish Lakish says, maybe he gets to bring it Eini Kore, does not read the parsha. Why? Because Kinin Peros. Lav Kinin Naguftami. When I have the rights to what grows in the field, that does not mean that I actually own the physical field. The Gemara is now going to try to prove one way or the other. Eisver of Yochanan Rish Lakish. Rav Yochanan asked the question to Rish Lakish. The pasuk says, Ula Beischa. What is this referring to? So if you look further in the parasha of Bikurim, it says, "V'samachta b'chol atov asher nasan l'cha Hashem Elokecha." You will rejoice with all the good that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you, and it says, "U'leveisecha," and to your household, to your home. What is leveisecha? What does that come to add? In other words, "V'samachta b'chol atov asher nasan l'cha Hashem Elokecha u'leveisecha." You'll rejoice with all the good that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to you and to your household. What's the household? So says Rav Yochanan, Melamed sh'adam mevi bikurei ishto. Person could bring the bikurim of his wife. Ulebeisecha refers to his wife. Ulebeisecha melamed sh'adam mevi bikurei ishto v'korei. So you see very clearly that. Let's just understand. What does it mean that he brings from his wife? So we discussed previously in this Masechta, we learned this in Kesubis and a couple other places. When a woman gets married and she owns real property, there are two ways of dealing with it. There's either Nichsei Melug or Nichsei Tzom Barzel. But regardless, in any case, she owns the actual physical property and he does the work on it. So now in this case, she owns the property. And what does he have the rights to? He has the rights to what grows in the field. Still, what's the halacha? Ulubeisecha teaches me that when he is managing that field, he goes ahead and does the whole produce, he harvests it, he takes the bikurim, he brings it up to Eretz Yisrael, he's the one who reads the parsha of bikurim, and that's fine. So says Rabbi Yochanan, isn't that a pretty clear indication that if a person has rights to fruits, that he can actually bring bikurim, even if he doesn't own the physical land? Amar Le, Rish Lakish responded to him and said, Shani Hasam. You know why that case is different? Because the pasuk says, in such a case, he can actually bring the bikurim. But without the pasuk, I never would have known that he could bring it. Why? Because under normal circumstances, having rights to the produce of someone's field doesn't mean you actually own the field. Some understood this exchange went as follows. Shimon ben Lakish actually initiated this discussion. And he said, Rabbi Yochanan, the extra word, uluveisecha, teaches me that a person can bring bikurim from a field that is owned by his wife. Now, hold on. Says Rish Lakish, Hasam hu desiv lebeisecha. Specifically in that case, it says lebeisecha. Avol be'alma lo. But if you don't have a specific word in the pasuk to tell you that you can bring bikurim from a field that you don't own, but you manage, you would not be able to bring it. Amar le, tamadidi namimehacha. And he responded and said, you know what? I actually understand that the word lebeisecha is not specifically talking about a case of a husband and wife. It's an indication that any time you have a similar arrangement where there's a person who owns the field and someone else is managing it and has the rights to everything that grows there, the person who's managing it and has the rights to everything that grows there actually brings bikurim. So just a different way of understanding the pasuk. According to Rav Yochanan, the halacha is anytime a person has kinyan peros, or anytime a person has the rights to anything that grows over there, then it's as if he owns the land. According to Rish Lakish, it's specifically one case where that works, specifically where it's a husband and wife. Eisve, the Gemara tries to bring a raya to this case. Hayababa derech, a person who was on his way, ubikure ishto biyado. He has the bikurim of his wife's field in his hand. And Nebuch, the Shama, on the way, he heard Shemesa ishto. His wife died. Now, what happens when his wife dies, aside from the fact that the family is going to be devastated? But her property transfers to him. He inherits her estate. So now, essentially, as he was coming up to Eretz Yisrael, his arrangement changed. But when he left his house, he was simply the property manager who had the rights to everything that grows there. On the way to Eretz Yisrael, he's actually the owner of the property. Now, the halacha is, maybe vikore. He could actually go ahead and bring it and read. Now, hold on. The Gemara says, it sounds like the only reason why he can actually bring the Bikurim and read the Parsha of Bikurim is because Mesa in, because she died and the property transferred to his possession, that's why he could read it. Lo Mesa, if she does not die, lo, he would not be able to read. So it seems to indicate clearly that before she died, he could read the Bikurim, but he can't read the Parsha of Bikurim. Where it says no. Lo, huadin the afagav de lo Mesa. The truth is, even if she would not have died, we need to say this halacha specifically in this case. Why? I would think I would say that there would be a gezerah because of the halacha of Rabbi Yosef Bechanina. Why? Who is Rabbi Yosef Bechanina? What does he say? The Gemara says, Rabbi Yosef Bechanina. Rabbi Yosef Bechanina teaches us, batzron v'shigron b'yad shliach. A person cut off the fruits and he sent them in the hands of a third party. Umeis hashliach baderech, and the third party is bringing the bikurim, and nevach, he dies on the way. The halacha is, now the owner goes, he finds wherever the guy died, he picks up the stuff. Maybe ve'eno kare, he brings the bikurim, but he cannot actually read the parsha of bikurim. Why? Shenemar, for it says in the pasuk, v'lokachta v'hevesa. He will purchase it, so he will take it, v'hevesa, and he will bring it. Ad shetia lekicha v'hava ke'echad. Kamash malon. Rabbi Yosef Bechanina taught us a halacha, which is that there can't be a transfer of property in the middle. You have to have one guy who does the whole thing. You take it and bring it. If in the middle you transfer jurisdiction from a third party to the original first party, whatever it is, the bottom line is, if it changes, then you can't bring it because it doesn't fit with the words of the pasuk. I would say that when a man is bringing bikurim from his wife's field, if she dies in the middle, it'll be exactly the same thing. At the beginning, it was her field. As he gets to Eretz Yisrael, to Yerushalayim, then it becomes his field. So there's a transfer in the middle, so therefore he can't actually read the Parsha of Bikurim. Kamash Malan, that is actually teaching us that no, that's not true when it comes to a husband and wife, and yes, he can indeed still read it. We'll go a little bit further. V'az do lutamayu. Rav Yochanan and Rish Lakish are following their logic. The Itmar, before we learned Hamochar Sadeh was man Yovel Noeg. A person sells his field at the time that Yovel is Noeg. Well, now the halacha is while Yovel, the Jubilee, is still in process, we still know the count. But while it's actually being observed, every 50 years, all real property goes back to its original owner. So essentially, when you buy land, it's basically a lease. You're leasing the land until Yovel will come, which is exactly the concept of a person who buys land for payros. Because if you're buying land during Yovel, you'll never really own the land. You'll have the right to use the land, and anything that comes from the land up until Yovel, then you give back the actual physical property. So it's pretty much a parallel case. Rabbi Yochanan Omar, Rabbi Yochanan says, maybe vikore. What's the halach in such a case? Rabbi Yochanan says, as you'd expect, he brings Bikurim and he reads the Parsha of Bikurim. Rish Lakish Amar, Rish Lakish says, maybe ve'eno kare. He brings it, but he does not read the Parsha of Bikurim. Why? Rabbi Yochanan Amar, maybe vikore. Rabbi Yochanan says he brings the Bikurim and he actually reads it. Why? Because kinyan peiros, kinyan guftami. He's of the opinion that kinyan peiros, when I buy a field for its fruits, it's as if I own the actual physical field. Rish Lakish Amar, maybe ve'eno kare, because kinyan peiros lav kinyan guftami. It's exactly the same discussion. Therefore, Rish Lakish says he does not recite the Parsha of Truma because it's not as if he owns the physical land. Now the Gemara says, we have to actually have this halacha explicitly said in both cases. If we would have only said this halacha with regard to a person who buys the field and specifically articulates, I'm buying this field, I will not own the actual physical field, I'm just going to own the rights of what grows in the field. In such a case, maybe that's the only place where Rish Lakish is going to say, since it was so clear, it was so objective, there was no room to actually debate it. In such a case, you can't say he owns the physical property because that's what he said. But Bahach, When we're talking about Yovel, a person actually bought the field thinking that he's buying the field. It happens to be the halacha, he has to return it. Maybe he's going to agree to Rabbi Yochanan. For only going to say the case of Yovel, then I would say the opposite. Only in that case where he actually buys the field, where he thinks that he's actually buying the field. In such a case, Rabbi Yochanan says that's where he could actually recite the parsha of Bikurim. However, Bahach, when a person explicitly says, I'm only buying it for the Paris, but not the actual physical field, I would say he agrees to Rish Lakish, Sricha, and therefore we have to have both cases. Tomorrow's daf continues with this discussion. Everyone should have a wonderful day and a beautiful week. Gittin 2 tomorrow. I'm going to bring you Gittin 2. Volume 2. Volume 2. All right, there we go.